The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 10200, another episode of your friendly local New Zealand politics independent left media podcast. It's just me today. I'm doing an interview with friend of the show, Teanau Tuiono, who I haven't seen for some years, but he's a good bloke, and I will get him to introduce himself now. Maybe tell the folks a little bit about your background. Probably a lot of our listeners now don't know you very well, so a little bit about how you got into politics and, you know, considering today's conversation is going to be mostly kind of foreign policy heavy, your interest in that space and I guess your kind of underpinnings and how you got into this.
Yeah, kia ora everyone. My name is Teanau Tuiono. I'm Ngāpuhi, my tuppence from my mother's side and from the Cook Islands on my father's side, from the island of Archery. I'm a member of Parliament from the Green Party. It's the day job. Loving that job. It's a great job. So this is my second term in Parliament. Probably between those last two parliaments, I've probably handled most of the portfolios. At one particular point in time, either had them as the portfolio holder or looked after them for somebody else. This term, I look after foreign affairs, security and intelligence. I sit on the Intelligence and Security Committee as well. Pacific Peoples, I'm now Pacific, I'm mainly Pacific Island MP that we've got, particularly after we tragically lost Crystal Collins. Oceans as well. I'm an oceans spokesperson and workplace relations, so workers' rights. It's very important to me. Lots of stuff happening in this space as well. But in terms of how I ended up here, man, how does anyone end up in Parliament? To come from the activist side of things, I was in the activist background. So really involved in anti-war movement stuff, supporting the unions, of course. Because if you're going to be a good lefty, you've got to make sure that you support the unions and they're doing supporting the movement. And very, very, really hard as part of the Indigenous rights movement. So, Tino Rangatira Tanga, as a young person, I spent a lot of time on land occupations. This is a long time ago before there was any Facebook or Instagram or that other kind of carry on. So, you literally go there. So, I spent a bit of time there. So, I guess, call that the apprenticeship, I suppose. So, a bit of there. I did go to university, so I have got a law degree. Which has come in useful. That comes in useful in an activist and law degrees, I tell you. So that's part of it as well. Did bits and pieces at the United Nations. So we've done the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People. I lived in Paris for a couple of years working at UNESCO on Indigenous people's stuff as well. Yeah, and then I found myself in Parliament. That's the short version, man. Oh, 4 kids as well. I've got 4 kids. Married with 4 kids. That's important.
I won't tell them that you forgot them until the last possible minute. Don't worry about it.
Sure.
Cool. I mean, what's your emphasis been recently? If you could give us a bit of an update on kind of your engagement with different groups in New Zealand and the government positions and how you've been kind of working against those and your work on the policy committees and stuff.
Yeah. So the way we've done it with the Greens is I'm our foreign affairs spokesperson, but we've separated that off from trade. So Dr. Lawrence Unan is our trade spokesperson. And for me, often those things get entangled all the time. And so you'll go on a foreign affairs mission and they'll talk about trade. What about all the other important things that are happening, for example, around the Pacific, climate change, and make sure to take care of the oceans, the discrepancy between what the pay rates are in the islands for people here, because you have diaspora communities coming back and forwards within the islands as well. So there's that. It's a very, very we're living in a very conflict adverse place at the moment. Just turn on the TV, terrible. And so making sure that we can maintain our Green Party position is my job. One of the things that I have been pushing on and been quite vocal about is in the last term I put in a members' bill to stop the launching of military payloads from Aotearoa, New Zealand, mainly to do with what's happening up in Mahia. Rocket Lab has been launching payloads up there. The US military have been their clients for third-party providers who then provide services to the US military. What we found last year is that they had a contract with a company called Black Sky, and so Black Sky had and then Black Sky in turn had a contract with Israel. And my concern there, and I didn't push it, was that they signed off that permit, the extension of that permit 3 months into the war in Gaza. So the New Zealand government knew that was happening. They still signed it off, launched these things up. Next thing you know, we find out that Israel's using the full constellation of Black Sky as a part of their military and surveillance capability, all the while they were committing genocide in Gaza. And so there are those links. Those links are important for us to expose. It's important in terms of transparency and to hold the government to be accountable. It's all very well to send these things up and pretend you didn't know anything. But if you do know something, then accountability must be satisfied as well. And the government has been seriously lacking in that space. A couple of other things that have been really concerning for me. New Zealand opened up a Wellington office for the FBI, and people in the centre and the centre right will say, well, actually they've always been here as well, but we've got to look at it in the context of how that's happened. An actual physical office. And one of the ways that they announced the intentions of that office was during the 60th anniversary of self-governance of the Cook Islands, where they proactively talked about the opening of that FBI office and their intention to counter China. And so here we have Wellington FBI office that's opened, which is pretty much there to counter China. And they specifically mentioned what's happening in the Cook Islands, and I could talk a little bit about that later as well. And we also had Kash Patel come down there and actually mention that. And every time Winston and Judith in particular were pushed about the countering China, but they just kind of pushed it away and waved it off. When actually Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, was very clear about it. So what we have, which is very troubling for me, is a move towards greater entanglement with the US. I thought it was shameful when Winston went over to the UN and didn't align ourselves with other like-minded countries to recognise the state of Palestine. Instead, he went with Trump, what Trump was wanting to do. And we've seen Judith, for example, spending time in the Pentagon and et cetera, as well. So there's a lot of things that are happening. I think this government is dragging us closer to the US. You only have to read Trump's incoherent rants on social media to know that that's a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just to situate this conversation for the listeners, I guess it's important to say we're speaking on the 11th of April in the morning. These things are changing so fast at the moment that by the time this episode comes out, who knows? We could be in World War III. Too light of this, right?
It's true story.
It's crazy. I mean, we've got the president of the US like openly threatening genocide. The quote unquote ceasefire announcement from Trump, which was kind of hailed as this is, Iran is coming to an end, this war of aggression, but was immediately breached, as was pretty clear would have happened, by Israel bombing Lebanon, killing like 250, 300 people on the day in a pretty clear kind of strategic move to blow up the agreement. It's not even clear what's in the ceasefire agreement from the amount that I've been able to research. There was the original Iranian 10-point plan, US 15-point plan, but without getting, into the weeds, it seems absolutely ambiguous what's in it, and there's a lot of disagreement about what counts as that ceasefire. And in the meantime, we've got Winston again letting the country down by going and meeting Rubio in the US and not standing up for not just Iran, but New Zealand's place, right, as an independent actor on the world stage. Just not bringing it up, not doing the job, to my kind of way of thinking, right? If you're the foreign minister, it's your job to represent New Zealand's interests on the global stage, and like we're entangled in this, right? We're part of this global system, and it just seems like the New Zealand government has been like willfully blind to that, or trying to stay below the parapets is like the metaphor that people are using, but it seems particularly like nasty in this instance to me. And there was the distinction when the war started of Luxon and the government kind of acknowledging the war versus Australia and Canada supporting the war, but that's kind of disintegrated over time. And we even had Keir Starmer recently criticizing Trump more strongly than Luxon has. The whole thing just seems like we're basically in the same pot as them, right? We're certainly not against the war of aggression in Iran as a government, and there's kind of a growing sense of impunity, I think, and indignance about that, about Israel's actions and the US's actions. So I guess from a pragmatic lefty standpoint, what do we do about this? I mean, at what point is condemnation limited, right? It's easy to say, oh, we're not for this war, we're actually against this war. But what kind of concrete steps should New Zealand political parties, for example, with your foreign affairs brain on, be taking against this? Like what physical actions can we do?
Yeah, just to paint the picture a bit further. In my mind, this is directly Winston and Judith.
Mm.
So like if you look at their advice, he was advised to recognise the state of Palestine. So he's acting in his and he's doing his own thing basically. And part of my criticism is, well, actually, is this the Minister of Foreign Affairs talking, or is this the leader of New Zealand First talking? Because here we have a guy and a political party that's doing everything to make America great again, and they've pretty much forgotten to make New Zealand first. And you hear this absolute rock from them about how they want to support the workers and all this other kind of stuff, but they've been coming out hard on it. But then if you check the record, they've voted for all of that horrible ACT Party anti-worker legislation that has come through the House as well. So the question I have for them in particular is this the Minister of Foreign Affairs talking, or is this the leader of New Zealand First talking, positioning himself and the country to align with Trump? And I think that's an important question, and particularly for the National Party, because they're the ones that have enabled it. And so that's my challenge to all your National Party listeners.
We know you're out there. Yeah.
So there's that. So practically, I think there's a couple of things that we can do. If you look at what was happening in Iran end of last year, the economic sanctions, the impact that they had on Iran led to a lot of civil unrest. The unions were organising. Those things need to be lifted. We look just over in Cuba. There's been an embargo there for 60 years since the revolution on and off. But it's really hardened with the oil blockade, making it really difficult. And I spoke with the Cuban ambassador. He talked about how they had 11,000 children that were waiting for surgery, but the power keeps going off as well. So getting fuel into Cuba as well is important. These economic sanctions, this thing that the US does, are designed to create economic unrest with the population on the ground, and that's what was happening in Iran. And so you had the latest civil unrest there, and which resulted to the deaths of thousands and thousands of people, because the regime can be brutal. They killed over, and this is in the last numbers that I saw, and it's probably more, about 4,000 people, but people are estimating it could be up to 10,000 people as well. And we have had people over generations coming over to New Zealand from Iran as well because of the situation there with the theocracy there as well. But I think the point here is getting rid of economic sanctions is something that we should do, because they end up not punishing the leaders, which is what they've always intended to do, but actually ended up punishing the people. And this was also not as extreme, but I thought it was done in the same way. What I thought was a bad move on behalf of the government when the deal between the Cook Islands and China was exposed, and what New Zealand ended up doing by Winston was to cut core sector funding. So that was there was two lots, and the total sum was $30 million. And I thought that was a bad move, because you end up punishing the people. You're talking about defunding education, so schools, hospitals, health services, and those sorts of things, which is what that money's supposed to be going for. If you have disagreement with leaders, then there's things you can do, but they shouldn't. I don't think these sanctions work. all they've done is make things worse for people in Iran, worse for people in Cuba. So that's one thing that I think that we should be challenging as well. Some of the other things, we definitely need to be very more vocal about entangling ourselves from the US. They are letting people through the Strait of Hormuz, but we've entangled ourselves so much with the US. I don't think anyone's going to let a boat through for us. So there's that.
Yeah, we've been, sidling up pretty close to the US for a while now, right? And as you say, like Iran strategically, they want the end of sanctions and integration into the global economy. Like that's clearly their midterm kind of strategy, right? And any kind of negotiation. And the nuclear program's been their, I guess, bargaining chip, right? And now the Strait of Hormuz is their bargaining chip. And they seem like they've been a pretty, obviously, as you say, like brutal but rational actor in pursuit of those kind of goals, right? Much more predictable than Trump's America, that's for sure. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, you're right to like to point out the connection to Cuba and like the damage that sanctions have going on in the world. And, it goes all the way back to was Madeleine Albright saying, we think the price is worth it, of like thousands of children dying in that famous interview, to, damage a regime. But how do people in Western countries, look, we're people with like interest in foreign affairs, right? And interest in the kind of human rights and the well-being of people around the world. There's the kind of internationalism inherent in a lot of kind of leftist philosophy there. But how should people in Western countries, I guess, think about the imbalance in regimes that we don't support around the world, like Iran, for example, right? Killing, they say 5,000. I've seen studies saying like 7,500, maybe 10. There's that dodgy Saudi study that says like 45,000 or some crazy number. But who knows? Obviously not a good thing, right? But how do we criticize those things as a huge question as kind of foreign leftists without implicitly supporting military action or sanctions against those nations, right? It's quite hard to do.
Yeah, it is quite hard to do. I mean, and I think it's also important to see our place in the world as well. We're just just not too far away from the penguins down in South Island. We're not a massive global player. And so we are one of those in the Pacific. We're a big deal because we're bigger than the Pacific Islands as well. So recognizing our place in the world where we are. And so there's that as well. And so I think what we are seeing and is a move from respect for the international rules-based system to a powers-based system, or basically the power, big man politics, basically, whether it's Putin, whether it's Trump, whether it's the Ayatollah or whoever running the world, and we're moving away from the international rules-based system. And I think by advocating for the international rules-based system, that gives us more of a say, gives us a platform to be able to work with people as well. And I know leftists are like, well, we need to build solidarity with the workers, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just talking about the piece that parliamentarians play as well. I know that there are solidarity movements where the workers work across different movements as well. That's also part of it as well. But the part that the parliament plays is actually, well, if you make everybody kind of understand what the rules are, and if people step outside of the rules, then they should get criticised, whether they're people we like or not. And that's supposed to be how it works. You have things like the Universal Periodic Review, for example, and people are kind of examined by all the other countries about whether they're adhering to different human rights mechanisms or not. And that's how it's supposed to be. So if the US steps out of line and criticise them, the Iran steps out of line and criticise them, and that's the rules that we're playing by. And I think we need to, because of our relative size, we need to adhere to that. And my sense is countries around the world, particularly those middle powers, so I'm talking about Canada's, EU's, to a lesser extent, the bigger players like India and stuff like that, and we'll be trying to figure out ways to work around Trump in particular. Particularly the countries that have those historic links, like Japan, for example. I was there not long ago with Speaker of the House, Jerry Brownlee, and they were trying to figure out, well, actually, they look to the White House and see what's happening there and want to figure a way to work around them. Because, the US is the most powerful country on the planet. They're incredibly dangerous. And what we can see now, incredibly volatile.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, you have to take that into consideration with the way that you strategically engage with different countries, right? I mean, this kind of latest conflagration in West Asia just, I guess, shows again that like, Israel has basically become like a rogue terrorist state. Just, engaging willy-nilly. It does what it likes. It's never really called to heel by the global community. But it's not a hegemon in the same way as the US, right? It's a regional power, and there are ways you can act as a country different towards them as you could towards the US. I mean, I don't think it's realistic, for example, for New Zealand to like cut off trade with the US. That would be crazy to do that overnight, right? But we obviously need to take some kind of shift in direction in the way that we materially engage with these foreign powers if we're going to plan for the next 50 years, 100 years of stability. And the US isn't it, right? Sure, Trump is like a particularly sharp, throws it into particularly sharp relief. But I mean, the US over time has been becoming more unstable, and
Yeah,
the support structures and the kind of finance capital system there all are pushing the incentives in the wrong direction. So, I mean, as you say, like engaging with middle powers around the world and our neighbors is obviously the going to be the future, right?
yeah,
And then just economically, we probably need to be more self-sufficient, right? This also shows that the global kind of interlinking of trade is incredibly fragile and hinges on a really damaging addiction to fossil fuels still,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
So this is kind of the perfect issue for the Greens to be making hay, because it's
yeah.
climate change, it's peace, it's like global security, it's hitting people's pocketbooks. It's all the things that are quite easy to wrap up and say, look, this is why we need like a green vision of the future. Yeah. So how's that been, I guess, trying to communicate that message?
Yeah, I mean, like the trouble, the issues there is just trying to get that cut through as well, because
Mm,
also culture wars are being imported in. So while all this is happening, you've got the right wing populists cosplaying as friends of the workers all around the world, trying to stop trans people from using the toilet. That's how disgusting they are. Or pathetic things like the English language bill or treaties principles bills and those sorts of things as well. So they dangle these cultural wars issues, and we get caught in the mire when actually we need to be focused on exactly what you've said. And that's the challenge for us as the Green Party, but leftists right around the planet. How you just focus on those bread and butter issues, because that's really talks to what people are saying. So, for example, everybody's feeling the pinch in the pump because of the war in Iran, so that's made it more topical. Everybody is aware of what Israel is doing, but Israel's been doing this for donkey's years. They've been doing it for decades. They've been vicious and feral against the Palestinians since its inception. And this genocide is that at the next level. But there was a trajectory to that particular point, and people have been following it for a while. Will recognise that. And so I think that's the playing field that we're playing in terms of trying to get that cut through. The other side have got deep pockets, lots of money, because it suits the multinational corporations and the right wing with the big money to actually have a bit of this chaos, so it's easier for them to make money over planet and people. So that's what we're dealing with as well. But also, there's another point around the disintegration of how things work, and I think that's an important point here, particularly here in the Pacific. We also often talk about the geopolitical tension between China and US. Well, that's just there, mate. Now, you go around the Pacific, USA, which was the development part of foreign policy levers, if I can put it that way, to do something, and that's disappeared everywhere around the world. And for example, you have in countries like Fiji a rising HIV pandemic, where that funding would have been used to curb HIV, along with a myriad of other issues. And the US's only interest in the Pacific is military. And on the other side, you've got China waving around an open wallet, with throwing cash around as well, looking incredibly stable and coherent. And so Pacific Island countries get criticised when they look to China or look to other providers, but they're seeing it the same way that other people are seeing it. The US is so incredibly volatile and unstable and people want stability as well. The point, and this is Green Party policy, we want to untangle ourselves from Five Eyes. I think it's done its day. I would prefer that we were not part of that, and also to be a lot clearer about abandoning AUKUS, which is, in my mind, what the US's only real interest here in the Pacific is. And that's around, for those that don't know it, it's a security pact based on a whole lot of nuclear submarines for the Australians, and it would, I think, contribute to militarization of the Pacific, which I don't think is in our best interest.
Yeah, and there's the other, just to continue on the, I guess, defense line of thought, there's been increasing kind of interoperability work from the defense force that this government and the last government actually weren't great on. We used to use Austrian rifles, which I only just learned the other day, but now we've switched to NZ made. There was the Keith Locke some years ago was writing about the kinds of Navy hardware we were buying being only interoperable with US aligned kind of countries. And all of these things kind of pull us away from a plausible position as an independent actor, which there's this kind of, it's almost become a cliche now, the independent foreign policy shtick that we like to think of ourselves as like a small country, morally punching above our weight, which, over time I think has kind of been true sometimes and not so true other times.
That's true.
But I mean, does that mean anything anymore? People on the right are saying we have an independent foreign policy because we make decisions for our own best interest. There's almost like a make New Zealand great again undertone to the way that they can use that kind of line. I noticed the Māori Party a few years ago started talking about non-aligned, I guess in a throwback to the not aligned movement kind of days.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a conversation worth having there about what independent foreign policy even means in 2026 compared to the 80s, 90s, and 2000s?
Yeah, I think so, because we're not independent, right? I mean, and the thing is, just to give it a bit more context, right, with the $12 billion that Judith won, good politician for the wrong things, I would say, run a commitment of over $12 billion and more, is that we were told when that budget came through was that we're in the middle of the cost of living crisis, we're going to tighten our belts, and they cancelled 33 pay equity claims of the poorest, from the most poorly paid, predominantly women workers, lowly paid women workers. 33. So we're talking about assistant librarians, caregivers, etc. And at the same time, passing a commitment to give $12 billion to the military. And here's the number for you. The Javelin missiles cost $400,000 each. So it's like, okay, no, we're sorry, we're too great, but we're going to spend $400,000 per missile for these Javelin missiles. It's just like, on one hand, to say one thing and do the complete opposite with the other, or screwing over the working class. So I think that's an important part to make. Interoperability is expensive too. Making sure that you can plug and play with the Americans comes at a cost. And I mean, I'll try to ask questions around, well, how much does it cost to unplug? And they've said, well, we can actually unplug, and we are actually independent, etc. But if you're only getting information from one side, from one group, and hearing arguments from one side, then that's pretty much where you're going to head towards. So we're not independent. I don't feel like that is coming through very strongly. And I think the right need to think about that, because they say all this stuff, but then all of a sudden, I know that some of them were pushing for us to go join the Americans in Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, that's not, I don't know. But this is the problem with independence as a framework, I guess, right? Is it can kind of mean whatever you want it to mean. And then as you're bringing up the way that China's regarded in the Pacific and increasingly globally, it's a much more rational and predictable ally to have financially and in terms of supplying actual goods and money that you might want, right? And as we're looking into the 21st century, just some quick kind of stats in terms of like the future focus of China as opposed to the US. They haven't been hollowing out their manufacturing capacity and pumping it all into $400,000 Javelin missiles like some countries. They're making 90% of global solar panel production, hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese exports are going to inevitably result from any kind of cut down in fuel, right? So closing the Strait of Hormuz, for example, or even the kind of limitation in that supply is only going to, in the short term, redound to China exports benefits because they've just owned the renewable energy space for the last 10,
Yeah.
15 years. Chinese companies own 50% of cobalt production and increasing, which is obviously needed for batteries. Yeah, huge market share, right? Electric vehicles, 90% of all consumer UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, are drones. And they've committed decades and billions and billions over that period to creating what is, I think, pretty much undisputably now the world's most efficient renewable products and with highly optimized kind of global supply chains. So looking forward, to the next 10 years, 20 years, what on earth is the point in continuing to sidle up to America? It looks like fear, right? It looks like cowardice and refusing to forge our own kind of path.
Well, the whole modus operandi of the New Zealand First Party is a mixture of toxic nostalgia and opportunism. So there's that. And I think that's underpinning the current trajectory of foreign policy for the New Zealand government. And probably the most ironic thing I remember was during that announcement of the Wellington FBI office was the very next day. Todd McClay gets up, the Minister of Trade, to try to explain why we got pinged 15% tariffs. This is like 24 hours, I think it was. It was like, wow, okay. So New Zealand government, they roll out the red carpet for these guys, and next thing you know, you get pinged 15%. Because that's the reason why Judith and Winston have been going over there, cuddling up to Trump to make sure that we don't get hit by the tariff. Well, it isn't working because Trump doesn't care about Judith or Winston's opinions. And the same thing when he went over to go see Rubio as well. What a waste of time that was. He should have flown over him and gone to see Mark Carney over in Canada, who's having more pointed kind of discussions with the Americans as well, because those are the people we need to be talking with. Get over this lot. So there's that as well. We don't want to be, if you want to be truly independent, you don't want to be controlled by anyone. So whether it's the US or China. I think the problem with the right is they don't mind us being controlled by the US. I'm stubborn, mate. I don't want us to be controlled by anybody but ourselves. And I think our best interests are in having a stable Pacific. So for me, the most important relationships are those ones in the Pacific as well. If we stabilise the region, then that provides, it's good for the front yard and the backyard of Aotearoa New Zealand. And that's, I think, where the focus needs to be. So making sure that everything is Kate's part of all the Pacific Island countries is actually, it should be at the forefront of foreign policy as well, and making sure that that's good and trying to work in tandem with them as well. And so I think that's where our future is as well. Being careful of how we deal with different countries as well, and knowing the massive economic power that China has as well. We shouldn't walk in there and just sort of uninformed and stuff like that. We need to also be careful. But you look at those two countries, one of them is stable and one of them isn't.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, more and more countries are going to be making these calculations, right? It's not it's fundamentally not a moral question, right? It's a political economy question. And like some countries who are planning for the future and the well-being of their people, I mean, Indonesia just announced in the wake of the fuel crisis that they're going to 10x their demand for solar in the next couple of years. And I mean, these kind of high population, but kind of middle powers or that kind of region of the world, that kind of space, I guess, are going to be only gaining power, right, in the next 10 years geopolitically. And I think that's where we need to be looking, right? We need to be just keeping those kind of alliances strong with that middle kind of space.
Yeah, and also sort of, trying to get engaged with China as well, and sort of being clear about what independence means for us as well, and because there's always differences as well. I mean, they'll have their own interests at heart. We'll have our own interests at heart, and where you can work together, but where there's differences, be clear about it. And the point of the international space system is people overstep that, well, then you can sort of call them to account. But if you're having all these, big man politics destroying all that, well, then that makes it difficult. But I think it's in our best interest to make sure that those rules stay in place. And so there's that as well. And probably interesting enough, I'm not sure if I mentioned them, and later today I'm going to jump on a plane and go to China with Jerry Brownlee. So we had Chairman Zhao, who was I think he's 2 under Xi Jinping, come and visit the New Zealand Parliament. And his equivalent is the Speaker of the House, Jerry Brownlee, and I'm one of the assistant speakers of the House. So this will be the most high-level delegation from the New Zealand Parliament to go to China this year. And if that cyclone doesn't blow too hard, I should be on a plane to go over to see some of these things. Actually, they've invited us to go and have a look at an EV factory, electric vehicle factory as well, which apparently is run by robots. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, well, they have those dark factories there, right? That they don't even turn the lights on because there's no one working there anymore. It's just robots making electric cars.
Okay.
It's magic.
Yeah.
No, I can't wait to hear how it goes. We'll have to get you back on afterwards.
Yeah, get me back on. I mean, I'm not the sort of person to be wowed by people in terms of them rolling sort of engagement, but I think these engagements are important. They'll put their best foot forward for us, I think, which is important because you want to be able to have good relationships. But we need to come at this with a clear mind in terms of what our interests are for, those of us living here as well, and also acknowledging all of the issues that are happening around the world. So I'm interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you're an MP. It would be concerning if you weren't saying we should be looking after New Zealand.
Hard out, bro.
It's in the job description. But so that's good to hear. But definitely, just in terms of like that, I know that word nationalism is kind of accrued a lot of baggage now, but on that kind of like economic nationalism like thought process, and I guess how vulnerable we've proven ourselves to be over the last few weeks, but beyond that, I mean, for decades, right? The Green movement has been all about resilience, right, and like economic security, locally made stuff, small kind of ecosystems thinking. There's been a couple of press releases out recently from the Greens that I thought were really good in terms of talking, like foregrounding that discussion about like economic security leading to better livelihoods, which I love. Like I love that messaging, right? I think that's what is going to really like capture people's imaginations if we can against this bloody useless government. But what's the plan? What's the plan there? I mean, the Greens. I saw the Green budget. No big. We should nationalize the airports or whatever. But in terms of in terms of big strategic thinking, what's the direction of travel you think that makes sense for the Greens to take on those questions?
Well, that stuff is the foundation for the direction of travel. We'll have a number of policy announcements come up that will hopefully encourage people to vote for us. So that's going to be ongoing, and parties working through that in terms of its timeline. And so I expect that to come out. A number of those to come out as well to sort of explain exactly what our different things are. What I will say is, like, we also put out a manifesto, and so sometimes what happens in politics is the thing that we're obsessed with in terms of being Greens are not the things that people are going to vote on. And so we might be vocal about one thing, but actually the thing that Green-orientated people are really passionate about, that might not be necessarily one of them as well. And it also pays to actually focus as well. If we look at the success of Zach Polansky and Green Party in England, and also Zoran Mamdani, they were very focused. They didn't talk about 20 things. They talked about 3 or 4 things as well. And you've got to talk about everything, but you need to focus on certain things as well. So I encourage people to sort of look at that as well. And if you want the more granular detail to get into the manifesto point as well. Probably a couple of highlight issues which will explain the trajectory as well. First of all, we need to fix the tax system that is not working. And the debate is shifting from talking about whether we should tax the rich or not. Of course we should, to actually what that might look like. And so the Labour Party, for example, are talking about a narrowed down capital gains tax. Finally, we're talking about capital gains. We've been pushing on a wealth tax. We think that is where people are not working and they're accruing wealth, year in, year out. That's where we need to be focused on to make sure that the tax system's fairer, and that would ensure that we could actually pay for a whole lot of these other things. So our criticism today of the narrow down capital gains tax approach as well. I'm actually not going to pay for as much as we need. So one of the things that was really popular in our last the last election was pushing for free dental, for example. That's just bloody expensive. So we'll be using that as a platform to, I think, have that proper discussion about what a progressive tax system should look like, and then I think we need to be very clear about what the numbers are. Probably not in the election debate sort of side of things, but if we win and we're in coalition with the Labor Party, then we're going to be clear about what the numbers are going to give us in terms of that potential negotiation with them in terms of tax reform and the amount of money of the money packages that you can actually get the things that ensure that we can have, energy independent in Aotearoa New Zealand. And the things that we talked about in the last election, for example, which I think would have helped us, a lot of us, was, for example, a clean energy package where we talked about there'd be X amount of money which people could apply for via the regional council. Regional council would be the regulator, and that would help to transition people off gas, which we now know is a big problem when you've got a war. So that was one of the things. And we also had the clean car discount, and this government couldn't get rid of that shit fast enough. And it turns out all along that would have helped people to transition to EV, solar, all that kind of stuff as well. And now they've just left it for the market to do. It's bloody stupid. So I think you can expect more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that's the stuff people love. Bring it on. And then, when not if the Greens win in the election, or if, let's say there's a coalition government. I mean, the Ardern, just foreign policy thinking, the Ardern government started the pattern of New Zealand attending NATO meetings in Europe. Labour traditionally doesn't have very similar foreign policy kind of positions to the Greens on a bunch of these more maybe anti-empire kind of positions, or free trade versus fair trade, all these questions, right? How do you both campaign distinctly from and draw some, I mean, you have to have some kind of red lines, right? I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but if New Zealand was under a Labour Green government and the US declared war on Iran, again, and Labour said, yep, sure, we'll send some bombers and some SAS, I would hope the Green Party would put up more than just a fight to that, right? That could be would you say that's fair to say?
I would say that's fair. It'd be very difficult to just go ahead with that if we're in the room.
Yeah.
In the last parliament they had all the numbers, so we had to use the power of persuasion to do things.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how well that went.
If you're in the room and you've got the numbers, then it can be like, well, actually, mate, let's think about this. That's not a good idea for these reasons. So it'll really depend on what it looks like afterwards, and when they're actually around that table, for us to really push our view of the way that things should be as well. And that should be interesting. Their current foreign affairs person is Manishi Walters. She seems to be really onto it. He's a person to talk to, human rights lawyer, etc., etc. I would think that she would be sympathetic to some of our views as well. Probably with the red line kind of thing, foreign policy doesn't usually float to the top when you're in the coalition agreements. It's more like tax reform,
taxes,
like energy, hospitals, education, those kind of things. That's where usually the red lines are as well. But if we're around the table, my expectation would be that our views would be guiding the next government. But man, you got to look into the crystal ball, read the tea leaves to see if that's actually going to happen or not,
Oh, absolutely. But they either need you or they don't, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if you're not needed, you're right. They're going to do what they're going to do. But then there are those historical distinctions like GCSB, right? SIS, as you said, probably Rocket Lab, Mahia, Five Eyes, that stuff is probably not going to be the same position between the Labour Party and the Green Party.
Yeah.
At least on most of those points, right? That's the stuff that can get difficult as stuff arises. As you say, probably not in the actual initial conversation, but as global affairs inevitably crop up over the first years of a coalition, that's the kind of thing that, do you think, could get sticky in a coalition?
For example, with when they're, I'll give a specific example because I've had a problem with Rocket Lab for a while now, and the way I think that could be sorted is around the way that the actors what's in the Act and what's not in the Act. You have the Outer Space High Altitudes Act and the permission of the different payloads. So like Rocket Lab will say, well, actually, we've adhered to all the laws they have. The problem with the laws, it just doesn't have enough specificity in my mind, what is or isn't within the national interest. So there's a couple of things, like if you fire up a rocket or a satellite, you can't hit anybody else's stuff in outer space. That's a no-no. You can't send up any nukes because we're nuclear free. But one of the other things in there is it can't be against the national interest. It can't contravene the national interest. Well, what is that? What is the national interest? It turns out it depends on who's in the driver's seat. So at the moment, the national interest is determined by Judith Collins and Winston Peters. Or Judith is leaving this week, that role, so it'll be Chris Peck. But that's what the national interest is. And so you could launch something up on behalf of Black Sky and forget all about it and not do too much digging. And then they can get another contract with Israel and contribute to the genocide that's happening in Gaza. When actually the question should be, is that actually in the national interest or not? And so I think having more specificity around what the national interest might actually solve that bit. But that's just me theorising here as well. And we did try to push that through when they were reviewing the law. So actually, let's look at that bit. Let's look at a couple of other things and put some good checks and balances in, because this is not cool what Rocket Lab are doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, statute change, right? Like, it'd be pretty easy to do if you're in government. And you're right, probably Venusia Walters would be a good person to work on that stuff with. She seems great, to be honest. Like, stuff I've seen from her so far, she seems super solid. Looking forward to seeing you two working together on that stuff. And then in terms of like specific green movement, like awesome always to hear you talk about like the Pacific neighborhood stuff. That's obviously like a key security concern and like economic regional concern for us. That's what we need to be thinking about. You know, if the Pacific's unsafe, we're unsafe. And if the Pacific's poor, we're poor. So it's stupid not to like include them as our whānau, and think about it that kind of way. But in terms of like a military perspective, we don't need $12 billion of more military to project force over that space. It's an economic question, right? And a trade question.
Yeah, probably like I can't remember who I was talking to, but I was also sort of thinking about how this whole thing is played out as well, whether it's actually been thought out very well. And for some of the vehicles that is actually going to be involved in that $12 billion purchase, I don't know if they're going to fit on the back of a Hercules. You know what I mean? You're buying these things and they're meant to be deployed overseas. How are you going to move it? It's not going to fit on the back of that plane, though. So there's those practical questions as well. The actual cost benefit of $400,000 Javelin missiles. When actually, if you look at what's happening just here within Aotearoa, New Zealand, the amount of times that we've had to get people to different organisations, and in my mind, military is no different, to deal with climate change-induced weather events. It's happening on the regular every year, but you know, these weather events are supposed to be happening one in 100 years, but they're happening every year at the moment. And we could possibly have one tomorrow. Yeah. And so I think, I get it. Some of them want to go over there and play soldiers with the Americans, which I don't like. But there's the other bit around making sure that there is support there for disaster management. Marine protection is a big one. You talk with the Tongans, for example. They've got, the last time I talked to them, they had one patrol boat to patrol the area of California. And so what can we do to make sure that poachers aren't out there, that kind of thing as well. And so there's things that can be done, which I think would help, like so disaster management, marine protection, making sure that illegal fishing boats aren't out there as well. And so that budget, that $12 billion plus and whatever, it should be made to make sure that we take care of that first, and then whatever else.
But afterwards. I mean, we don't need a traditional military to be doing that job, right? That's a Coast Guard job, essentially. Like, you could have an entirely different force doing that stuff, right? We don't need to be buying the exact kind of kit. I mean, we could even have like a parallel military, just military, I say in inverted commas, but like a disaster management / Coast Guard / poaching protection force kind of unit. You don't need Javelin missiles or any of that nonsense for that.
No, you don't. Yeah, and they're probably cheaper too, you know?
Way cheaper.
And they've got this, I was questioning them as well, because when they come to the committee, we've actually got to the select committee, you're actually talking about the budget. So when people tune in, they're like, "Oh, that's weird." Well, it's weird because we've actually had to hold them to account for the money that they said they're going to spend, and then measure it against the money that they actually spent, and so on and so forth. Which is why the discussions we have are that way. And one of the questions I had is around drones, because they want to look at new technology, et cetera, and looking at the way that things are playing out in the Ukraine. And they had no idea what they're going to cost. No idea, mate. So it could be because you're going to, because I was worried about, I'm worried about the $400,000 Javelin missiles connection. How many librarians would that pay? How many caregivers would that pay as well? Did you really need to take their money to buy this stuff? No, you didn't. As well, and particularly if there's cheaper options to do the things that you want to do, and that's part of the accountability, transparency thing that we need to hold them to account on. And they've got no idea around that as well, because something that could cost a bunch of money today, you probably might be able to pick it up at JB Hi-Fi for $100. Have they done anything? Doesn't look like it, or not much.
Yeah, I mean, so much for fiscal responsibility, right? As usual, parties on the right actually don't give a shit about that.
No.
That's all deficit-funded tax cuts and shilling money for the military-industrial complex, as always. But we should probably wrap up. Do you want to leave the people with some wise words of where they can follow you, get involved with the campaign, all that traditional final word stuff?
Yeah, final word stuff. As the Green Party's most useless MP on social media, please follow me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm on the Blue Sky too as well, and I saw that my mate Francisco Hernandez is on LinkedIn. And I was like, "Oh mate, I got to get into LinkedIn as well." Hope not. So anyway, I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. If you want more of this inspiring political dribble from me, always good to sort of talk to folks as well. It's a quickly moving world out there, and it's becoming more and more dangerous. I think we do need to take care of the Pacific. We need to make sure those are the relationships, in my mind, which are the most important. We need to decouple ourselves and untangle ourselves from the US empire. It looks like it's falling to pieces by the day, but sometimes these things take ages to fall over. So making sure that we've got enough resilience in there as they topple over, that we don't topple over with them. But also at the same time trying to have good relationships with everybody as much as possible, and recognizing that other folks around the world are trying to navigate the world in the same ways that we are. We need to be able to make sure that we can build on that, build on those relationships, and make sure that we can do everything to take care of the people, take care of the planet. We're the Greens. The environment is incredibly important for us. So climate change is real. Newsflash, sure, the conspiracy theorists out there as well. To make sure that we can do everything that we can to provide for not only for ourselves, but our children and our grandchildren. So Matt, over to you.
Kia ora, beautiful. Thanks, Teanau. Appreciate it. We'll have to get you back on when you're back from China to tell us the tales of the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah, man.
We'll look forward to that. Cheers, mate. Safe flight. That's been another episode of 10200. We'll catch you next week.
If artificers are, then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's apart now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're on the road to hell.